welcome to everyone who's been with us, to everyone who's just joining. We're here today to discuss private 5G networks and AI at the edge, together with Hub Security's very own Gaurav Sharma, VP of North America at Hub Security, alongside a number of technology and security experts, including Ravi, Kumar, Palepu. Welcome, Renan, Antoniolli, Mukesh Bansal, and Utpal Mangla. So thank you all very much for being here today, and thank you for the patience, the technical difficulties. We're going to start our webinar with a brief introduction from Gaurav Sharma on cyber security's role in securing 5G and AI infrastructure, and then our panelists will each get a chance to briefly introduce themselves to our audience. Afterwards, we'll get into a bit of a deeper discussion on everything related to private 5G and network security, including its challenges and solutions. And as usual, we'll leave about 15 minutes at the end of our discussion for a short Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout the discussion, like I said, feel free to drop them in the Q&A section below, and we'll get to them later on. Now, we have an impressive lineup of panelists today, and I'm excited to have them introduce themselves to you. But first, we'll begin with a few words from Gaurav Sharma. He is the VP of Business Development at Hub Security, and then we'll hand off the mic for some introductions. So take it away, Gaurav.
Thank you, Sterni. Hi, everyone. My name is Gaurav Sharma, as Sterni mentioned, and I'm representing Hub Security today. Just a quick introduction. Hub Security is a cybersecurity company that focuses on a specific area of cybersecurity called confidential computing. And this we've seen is very applicable to the topic that we're going to discuss. So we're very excited to host this webinar. We hope that you enjoy this conversation. But before we kick it off, I just wanted to take a few minutes to explain why this is such an important topic and why we assembled such a distinguished panel of experts. So we're going to discuss 5G and edge computing today. And these technologies and adjacent technologies are really transforming multiple industries, right? If you think about smart manufacturing, you think about precision medicine, precision agriculture, smart cities, autonomous driving, and you get the picture. And these technologies are really driving transformative initiatives in a lot of enterprises. And according to estimates, within next 2 years, the spending on 5G and edge computing is supposed to reach more than $250 billion. And the other thing to note is that there's going to be massive amount of data that is going to be generated because of these technologies. And you can imagine that these technologies and the massive amount of data is going to drive a lot of intelligence that is going to become a competitive differentiator for a lot of enterprises. So that is why this is such a key topic, and we're really excited to host this webinar. And with us, we have, as Sterni mentioned, a distinguished panel of experts who are going to help us demystify these concepts. We'll discuss some challenges, and then talk about how can we move forward successfully leveraging some of these technologies that we've discussed. So I hope you enjoyed this webinar, and with that, Sterni, back to you.
Thank you, Gaurav. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's get to know our panelists, starting with Ravi. Why don't you tell us a bit about your background and what perspective you bring to the panel today?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks a lot, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening for the global audience. So I'm Ravi Kumar Palepu, working currently with Virtusa as a global head of telecom and media solutions, along with 5G. A total industry experience in comms and media, approximately 24 years, work across the US, Europe, and APAC market. Primarily, my role is to work alongside with telecom operators in launching 5G networks and the services. But we also work very closely with the industries and enterprise segments to really build industry solutions which can really expedite their transformation or a digital journey. So what I really bring into the webinar is a lot of experience in terms of how the entire app market and the data market is really transforming the entire 5G experience that will deliver to both consumers as well as to the enterprise. So really looking forward to this wonderful discussion that we're going to have.
Thank you. Thank you, Ravi. Thank you for being here. Renan, let's go to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm a Brazilian guy. Sorry if I'm in English. but here still live in Brazil. I'm a business developer. My name is Renan Antoniolli. I'm a business developer in 5G market here in Brazil. I'm in charge about Brazil and Latin America market. We keep in touch with the most important operator here in Brazil to building and public and private networks. I'm a specialist in smart cities and IoT, Internet of Things, with degrees in telecommunication engineering. I have two MBA in business management, and I'm glad to share with these guys, with these panelists, with you attendants, some ideas of 5G private networks. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Renan. Thank you for being here with us. Mukesh, let's go to you.
So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And I'm Mukesh Bansal, around 25 plus year experience in the telco sector. My primary role, I'm heading the telco solution, as well as the Europe and UK CSP market, where we are selling the various telco solutions, including the private 5G or other 5G solutions, 4G solutions, and security solutions. We are also helping not only the telco customers or CSP customers, even the NEP customers and enterprise customers in setting up their private 5G and other or kind of helping them in the connectivity segment to have the proper telco communication on those enterprises. That's my role. And I'm here to kind of discuss on the 5G security, 5G more details. We'll learn from the panelists, and I also will share my experience over here. Thank you for inviting me on this panel.
Thanks, Mukesh, and thanks for joining us. Last but not least, we have Utpal Mangla.
Hi, team. Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Delighted to be part of this panel and talk about security in the context of edge, 5G, telco, private, LTE networks, etc. So really excited about it. I've been in the business for a long time, and in my most recent role, I run the edge cloud business for IBM and have expertise in multiple industries with specialization in telco, media, and entertainment, and really looking forward to this very important topic of our times.
Great, thank you, Utpal. Wonderful that you could be here with us. So now that we got a little acquainted, we're a little acquainted with our panel, let's head into our discussion segment of this event, which we've divided up into 3 topics. The first is just about 5G, IoT, 5G and AI, excuse me, market and technology generally. Just to give a short or a brief overview, a short introduction to some people who may not be so familiar with the topic. And then we'll go to our second topic, which relates to challenges, threats, and risks. So we're going to get the perspective of some of our panelists, some input to what they see coming and what threats exist today. And the third topic will be approaches and solutions, where we'll discuss different pieces of advice and perspectives around how to approach different problems, which we've covered in the second topic. So let's start off with our first question, and this is an open one to anyone on the panel who would like to respond. What is the 5G technology, and who are the key market players involved? You can just give us a brief overview.
Anybody? Renan, you want to take that one? Renan, can you hear us?
Yeah, feel free to just chime in.
Yeah.
Because it's a big question. So maybe we split it into 2 parts. So what is 5G technology? Let's start with this.
Okay, let me take this question.
Thank you, Mukesh.
5G technology provides 3 fundamental use cases which are differentiate from its predecessors, 2G, 3G, 4G. These fundamental use cases are enhanced mobile broadband, this particular use case give further features, distinguished feature, which help customers with higher capacity, enhanced connectivity, and user mobility. So higher capacity, like where the dense populated areas are there, they can have the better bandwidth. And similarly, enhanced connectivity, when if you see in the 3G or 4G world, if you are one side of the road, you get the connectivity, but the other side of the road, you're not getting connectivity. So how this can be enhanced? This is provided with 5G. Similarly, I have faced many times when I'm coming from London by train, many times your call get drops. So that user mobility experience is enhanced in the 5G. So there's the first use case, enhanced mobile broadband capability. Similarly, there are other use cases like ultra reliable, low latency communication. What does that mean? That whatever the application, mission critical applications are there, like if you see the autonomous vehicle driving, and that vehicle has to connect with the various other vehicles, vehicle has to connect roadside infrastructure, vehicle has to connect with emergency services. It has to be very, very kind of low latency and high reliability, high availability, and secure communication that is being provided by the 5G. Right? Like that, many different use cases differentiate the 5G from the other technology.
And I can jump in, team. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely, yes.
Excellent. Right. So just to augment what Mukesh said, in a nutshell, 5G provides 3 key unique differentiators compared to the prior versions. Number 1, greater bandwidth. Number 2, low latency. And number 3, network slicing. Those 3 combined are transforming businesses and transforming industries. Many things which were not possible before is possible now with 5G. Many things which were possible before but could not generate the speed, the scale, the automation, if you will, because of the lack of those 3 features, you can now take it to the next level. Back to you.
Utpal, maybe you can give us, thank you. Maybe you can give us some examples of some of these use cases.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Mukesh touched upon a couple of those, but let me give you an example or a couple of examples through multiple industries. Number 1, obviously, telcos are the ones who are enabling majority of these. And the reasons why telcos are enabling majority of these are because they have the 5G bandwidth spectrum. And so to monetize their 5G investments, it's not end customers like you and I who are going to pay extra bills. It's basically looking at ways to sell it to B2B customers. Now, going to examples of use cases, the ones where it's very prevalent are in the industrial and manufacturing basis, where you're able to take advantage of 5G, faster bandwidth, low latency, and in certain cases, network slicing capabilities to provide quick solutions on the shop floor. There are things like worker protection use cases. There are things like faster automation. There are things like visual inspection that can happen because of 5G. Now, the nirvana use case in a medical industry could be remote surgery, but I think we are far off from that thing from happening because none of us want to be on the other side having a surgeon do us from remote, but that's basically potential in a 6G environment, maybe not happening in 5G yet, but that's basically another nirvana use case for the futuristic. But realistically, as I mentioned, manufacturing, industrial, automotive plants, again, looking at devices, device repair, things like that, all of those are possible because of 5G.
Right, thank you. I think that was a great overview, and I will just point out that 5G is already being used within healthcare settings to help run AI and ML models. And so that's a really interesting use case already that you can explore. That also has a lot of discussion to be had, definitely around security.
That's right. And just to add on, and just to add on to that point, because you got me excited over there, and that's where a lot of the benefits of 5G also happen on the edge, because now you're looking at solutions that can be defined and deployed on the edge, including things like AI and machine learning models, which can be done on the edge instead of having to do it on the central cloud or the public cloud, if you will.
Thank you, Utpal. Ravi, I wanted to ask you, what are the investments, preliminary steps, and overall maturity of 5G within consumer and enterprise markets at the moment? I think you're muted.
My mistake. So I think if you say it's still a work in progress from a market perspective, because if you see the value chain, they are, for example, the telco operators who are pretty busy in rolling out 5G network across the country, across the regions. So that's actually happening at really good pace. But at the same time, once the network is available, you also see a great gamut of hardware infrastructure which needs to enable to provide those or consume these 5G services. So while we see currently the phones that we are using are 5G enabled, but you can also see that there's a huge market of device manufacturers who are really continuously upgrading their hardwares and softwares to make it enabled for the consumers to consume those services, right? So that's again happening at the same pace. Now, then you also have the apps market. We have seen in 4G how the apps have really gone, and to a great extent where consumers are so hooked on to using mobile apps for pretty much everything that they do. But if you see the current apps from a 5G perspective, some of the emerging technologies are really making some great investments. So for example, if you look at augmented reality, virtual reality, the whole metaverse that we are talking about is a great area or a use case for 5G to come in. We are using AI at pace, where the decision making is a lot faster, quicker, real time. Those kind of apps are really coming in both from a consumer perspective as well as from an enterprise perspective. So the app developments, again, is a huge investment area. And last but not the least is what I also talk about is industry solutions. Now, a lot of the enterprise organizations are using pretty old infrastructure in most of the cases. And they are really looking at that if I have to start enabling my robotic process automations, my IoT, and how much I can use my sensors and different data to make a real-time decisioning to make an impact on the day-to-day operations that we are doing, there's a huge use case for that, both from a cost-saving perspective, but also accelerating the time to market. So enterprises are really looking at those use cases to say how 5G can enable it. Now, this is not going to happen as a magic. So for us to make those industry applications work, there's again an investment of taking these applications and platforms, as Upal mentioned, both on the cloud side as well as on the edge side. So if you see the entire 5G and the entire ecosystem, the investment is not just on the network. So you can see applications, the devices, the industry use cases, the platforms, the clouds, everything is coming together. So we see that in the next year or so, while we don't see a lot of use cases getting implemented in the market, everything is running on a trials. But in a year or so, you will see all these use cases coming, really giving benefits to both the consumers as well as to the enterprises.
Definitely. Thank you, Ravi. That was an excellent summary. Renan, give us some perspective on the 5G private network market in Brazil.
Yeah, for sure. There is a market that is growing up here in Brazil, but we can see just the beginning of this. As a talking, Utpal talking about network slicing, it's the private networks here in Brazil seen as a network slice for a public network. when the carrier or a telco has a network slicing, can make a slice that network to give the client a private access to this public network. Is like a virtual tunnel that can be done at that public network to make the data more private. And we have a lot of vertical markets in Brazil, starting some POCs, proof of concept here in Brazil, of the 5G networks, but we need to looking for applications, needed to reduce some costs and improve efficiency of these industrial markets. Yeah, and we have here a kind of fear that 5G networks is something new, and all markets need to see the first step of this deployment. But I think that 5G networks and private networks in Brazil has a huge horizon to growing up. Back to you.
Thanks. I mean, yeah, Gaurav, you started this back to you thing. I don't think it's going to end. It's not obligatory. I just want to let you guys know that. So feel free not to.
All right.
Yeah, over now. Gaurav, I wanted to get you in the final question on this topic. Maybe just give us an overview of what role security plays in helping to accelerate the 5G private network adoption across the board.
Yeah. So, you know, when we talk about 5G, we talk about other things like edge computing and adjacent technologies, right? What we're seeing is 2 out of 3 IT organizations are struggling to get their edge 5G private network-based solutions adopted. And one of the big concerns is really security. Now, 5G by design, and Paul mentioned on it, it has some inbuilt capabilities and best practices for security, like network slicing, microsegmentation, some identity management, and encryption and all. But really what 5G focuses on is just the secure connectivity of the different components and the within the infrastructure. But there's still a critical gap in terms of securing the compute infrastructure, the applications, and so on and so forth, right? And that is where a lot of organizations struggle, because traditionally security has been very hard, time-consuming, and expensive. So we need to figure out a way to augment what 5G offers from a security perspective, but quickly fill in the gaps. And there are certain ways that we can do that, and we'll discuss that. The other piece that security really helps us is with the reliability aspect of it. And this was the other piece. So from a connectivity perspective, security really needs to make sure that the data is being delivered reliably from one part of the infrastructure to the other. So from the cloud to the edge or the other parts of the private network. And this becomes very important in terms of the adoption aspect of it, right? If you drop a packet, for example, when you're driving an autonomous car, that can have a very adverse effect on the outcome of what the autonomous car is supposed to do. It's just a simple example. And taking Utpal's remote surgery piece, that's one of the reasons why that is still an impediment. So security plays a good part in the reliability aspect, and it's also playing a very, very strong part in terms of connecting the different parts of the ecosystem. So there are the hyperscalers, the cloud providers, there are the edge solution providers, the MSSPs, the telcos, and so on and so forth that need to talk to each other. And that's where security plays a very good part of connecting them. But then there's also a need to make sure that they're securely exchanging the information and executing on that information in a secure manner, right? That's where security really comes in.
Does anyone want to add anything onto that? Okay, Ravi, you had your mic off, so I was not sure.
Just want to add further what Gaurav is mentioning. There's a fundamental of security, right? The concept, fundamental security concept is confidentiality, integrity, and availability, right? So all those kind of threats, whatever we are talking about in the IT network or telco network, can be clubbed into these categories, right? And as Gaurav mentioned, the 5G by design having various security controls which help or eliminate the threats which were there in 2G, 3G, or 4G network, right? And it also provides enhanced authentication. It provides subscriber identification and subscriber identity, and various other controls to help the network secure the network. And also, if you add further, 3GPP specified various foundations for enabling the 5G network. So that can be taken by the NEPs or who are deploying the network to make sure that those 3GPP specifications are taken care of.
Thanks, Mukesh. Yes, that's a great point. I want to move on to our second topic for today, challenges, risks, and threats. And I'll start off with our first question for Renan. From your perspective, what is the biggest challenge right now to the massification of private networks?
I think we have two big challenges to private networks. I think it's a global vision, but we needed to get lower prices because the price is still a challenge to get a massive private networks deployment. And we have also the knowledge of system integrators, not just looking for the telcos, the carriers, but to get the spread, the whole country, the kind of 5G networks we needed to training and get knowledge to the system integrators. I think that's the two big challenge to get massify the private networks, because we have three or four ways to deployment a private network. The private networks can be done by a telco using his core to connect the private network of the industry, as an example. But if you use a system integrator, you must be the core of 5G network or 4G network or something like that on premise inside of the industry facility. That's because we need the system integrator to deliver an end-to-end solution to that customer. So I think that's the two big challenge to massify the private networks.
Thanks, Renan. Paul, I wanted to ask you what kind of, because you mentioned edge computing already, maybe you can outline for us some of the unique challenges that exist, the security challenges that exist within an edge cloud environment.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are aware of the security challenges typically that exist historically in a distributed environment, now in a public cloud environment, especially with security, cybersecurity threats, etc. But edge cloud takes it to the next level, because now you're having situation where you're doing deployments closer to the customer, closer to the end location, so the potential risk of new threat actors, etc., significantly increases. Now, edge can have many connotations. You can probably be doing it on an edge in, let's say, 10 locations, or on an edge which is in 100 locations, or if you take it to the next level, which are like tiny IoT devices, maybe not traditionally edge, but that can be on thousands of locations. So as more and more 5G features come in, we want to do AI, modeling, data evaluation, etc., more closer to the edge to make a lot of these use cases real, but then it also opens up more holes or more entry points, if you will, for security risks to get penetrated.
Gaurav, anything to add on to that?
Yeah, so that's a good point. From Utpal's perspective, what he mentioned, it's really interesting and important, right? We're moving a lot of the critical workloads outside the traditional walled gardens of the IT infrastructure or the public clouds. And there are, terms like edge have different meanings. People mean edge in very different ways. But the basic premise is that now I'm moving my security or my critical applications outside of the security of my corporate firewall or the walled gardens of a public cloud infrastructure. So when I move it outside, we have to think about securing it more because now the attack surface has increased, right? It's more susceptible to outside attackers, and it's extremely easy for someone to break into it. Now, 5G, as we were talking about it, it has baked in some fundamental security concepts, but it's really focused on, as I mentioned previously, about connectivity. So it's focused on how do you connect one part of the infrastructure to the other, one application that is running in, let's say, edge A to edge B securely. But then once that the network connection is terminated, there's still a need to harden and secure the environment for making sure that no attacker can compromise it. Now, traditionally, it was done, as patchwork by running security controls across the infrastructure, for example, securing the operating system separately, securing the application separately, but we don't have the luxury, as I mentioned, right? The attack surface is increasing. So there is a way that we need to look at security differently and look at how we can move very quickly to secure the computation part and augment what 5G and technologies like SASE offer and basically bring in secure connectivity along with secure computation. And that's where I think confidential computing that we've been discussing about is a very key concept that can augment 5G security.
Yep, great. Thank you, Gaurav. I wanted to not jump ahead of ourselves, but Mukesh, maybe you have some input or you can share with us a bit about ways that organizations and partners can work to mitigate some of these security risks involved in the use of 5G.
Sure, thank you. So as Gaurav mentioned, right, so there are various risks which needs to be taken care. The nature of the 5G itself, you see the greater bandwidth, right? So greater bandwidth have the potential more DDoS attacks, which may impact the organization quite a high level. So that has to be taken care. Because now edge computing, a lot of applications are running as user end, and quite possible there will be more DDoS attack can happen. Now, other expansive nature of 5G, you see the 5G expanding very, very, very fast, right? As a number of users increasing from million to billions, number of devices increasing. So very difficult to track all those devices and have the preventive measures. And there may be weak link of the devices. There may be sophisticated attacks may happen, which may create issue in the 5G network. So that has to be taken care. So all the interfaces, device interfaces, those needs to be taken care. Now we talked about the network slicing, for mention network slicing, right? So network slicing is very good to teacher, but at the same time, because of the multi-tenancy of the enterprises of the same network, those hardware resources somewhere shared, right? So that again may be threat to the network if it's not taken care properly. So I want to add these couple of things over there.
Thank you, Mukesh.
Thanks, Mukesh. Ravi, I want to go over to you for our final question on this topic. What are some key points to take into consideration or the enterprises should take into consideration when implementing 5G backed use cases?
Yeah, sure. I think I'll probably give a little bit of elaborative answer to this one because it's very important for people to understand that when people talk about 5G, it's not that every organizations have to jump into 5G and that is the ultimate solution for everything, right? Because you need to understand what your business is looking for. And I put that into different categories. The first part is the whole infrastructure and the connectivity aspect, right? Now, what is important for is what is your current infrastructure and connectivity assessment that needs to be done, right? So a lot of people are running their smart factories, for example, using the fixed line services or a Wi-Fi or maybe a 4G services. Now, what they are not getting today, which 5G can enable, is a very important thing to understand, right? Because that is completely linked to the business outcomes, business deliverables, and how you want to run your operations within the company. And I think you probably will find that some of the technologies need not have to migrate into 5G. You can pretty much work in a combination of 4G and 5G, or a fixed line with 5G and vice versa. So there are different permutations and combination, in a typical 5G terms, what we call NSA and SA kind of an architecture, you can still work on that. So it's important for enterprise to understand the requirements of that, right? The second part, which is for them to also understand, is there's a big cloud element already sitting where all your applications are on cloud. So what is important for you to understand is what kind of applications really have to sit on edge. And that important decision can be only done once you understand that, hey, for these kind of my operations or my business functions, I need a real-time decisioning. I can't wait for my request to go onto the cloud and take maybe few seconds or a milliseconds to come back. But for example, in a factory kind of environment where two robots are talking to each other, you want the communication to happen pretty much in a micro millisecond environment, because otherwise one robot is passing something to the other. And if this robot doesn't understand, the whole logistic management or the entire supply chain will go wrong, all right? So for that perspective, it is important to understand that these kind of applications have to sit on edge. It could be related to authentication of a device. For example, all the AI components which will make the robots take real-time decisioning is an important aspect. For example, I also need to understand some of my what I call the augmented reality, virtual reality based applications is very critical for me to do real-time diagnostics and test and diagnostics kind of a function. It is also important to understand in some of the areas, like for example, if you're implementing a private 5G on a stadium, it is important for I understand how the content are being managed on an edge compared to which content I should push it on a cloud, because I need maybe a better latency on some of the content, but while the other content can come at whatever speed. So again, this application decisioning is extremely, extremely important, right? The third part, I think, which is still at a very immature state as an industry, what I see when I'm talking to the customers is, people ask me very often, who is owning 5G investments in the organization? Right. So some people will say if 5G investments is owned by a network infrastructure because that is 5G altogether. But I don't think we should look at 5G as an infrastructure or a connectivity product. It is a business service and a business product. So a lot of the organizations will struggle in terms of mapping 5G is owned by infrastructure division, whether it is owned by the CIO, whether it is owned by the chief product officer or marketing officer, so on and so forth. I think that governance is still, I think, shaping up. And that's the reason why we see that when you are trying to implement anything like 5G or a 5G use cases, you have to bring all the stakeholders today as it stands to make a really good compelling case as to why this 5G is important for the organization. So there's a governance part which needs to be taken into consideration when you're implementing a technology like this, right? And the last but not the least is a clear demonstration of delivering the business outcomes. That by getting into 5G, what you will finally want it to achieve, right? You want to improve your cost to serve, you want to improve your revenue, you want to improve your cycle time to take your products to the market. Those are very critical for you to do, because none of these use cases or investment will fly unless until you are clear on the use cases that you want to implement. And I personally feel that enterprises often look at what use case being implemented in the market, which is the right thing to do for them to understand, but they have to look at within the enterprise, which I think a lot of people struggle to articulate today as I speak, that if I have to implement a use case within an enterprise, what that use case would be. And there is no straightforward answer for any enterprise to give you by saying, hey, this is the use case we want to implement in 5G. So identifying and implementing, or even doing a pilot on a POC itself is a great opportunity today from an enterprise perspective. So these are different gamuts, and it goes, again, these are business challenges. When it comes to IT challenges, obviously, the edge is not a single edge box sitting on one particular location. There are multiple edge components sitting on multiple different countries and multiple edges sitting in the same region. So how the connectivity between the edge will happen, how those edge boxes will connect to cloud, what kind of connectivity will support me at the back end, these are huge decision-making points, and which also follow with that panelist who talked about the security aspects, right? So those are again, very, very important elements to consider while we go into it. So from a challenge perspective, I don't see it's a challenge, but it is a knowledge, and it is people awareness in terms of where to put their money is still a kind of an in-progress state what we are in. But I'm sure as we go along, this market will mature, and we'll see a lot of those use cases coming in.
Wonderful. And we have a very lively chat taking place. And I wanted to just ask anyone on the panel if they had anything to add to what Ravi shared, which is a very extensive overview, which is really helpful. Gaurav?
No, I think what Ravi said makes a lot of sense. We as a cybersecurity company ourselves are not talking to the security division for 5G and edge security, right? This whole investment is really very strategic for any enterprise, and is really part of the digital transformation, really taking the digital transformation story to the next level. So as Ravi mentioned, we're seeing this driven through the CIO, the CTO, or line of business that is introducing a new product to the market. And we're seeing this becoming a strategic priority because, as we mentioned in the beginning, and Utpal highlighted some of the really innovative use cases that unlock a lot of potential for businesses. But as Ravi mentioned, there is still a lot of hesitation in terms of deploying these. Security plays an important part to it, but then there's also the ownership issue, who owns what part within the enterprise. But I think this is going to start getting cleared very soon, and we're going to see all of these initiatives driven through the office of the CIO or the CTO, or some executive that is driving the digital transformation initiative.
Yeah, thank you. Great addition. Let's move on to our last and final topic, which is approaches and solutions. And we've already been talking about some approaches, so we'll just dive right in. Mukesh, I wanted to get your perspective on how ecosystems and engagement models are learning to evolve and adapt to the adoption of 5G.
So thank you. So when you're talking the 5G, as Ravi mentioned and Gaurav also talked, that before deciding, you must know what you want to achieve on the 5G network, right? Do you have really proper business case? Do you want to increase your revenue, or you want to kind of automate the various if you're manufacturing industry, do you want to automate those kind of things? So once you decide, yes, there's the right use case, and then you want to set up your private 5G, or you want to extend the 5G network from the different MNOs, you need to consider various like main thing is connectivity, right? When all the connectivity are secure, all the interfaces are secure, even though 5G by design, as you mentioned, we discussed, right? 5G by design provide a lot of security, but the organization perspective, there are a lot of loopholes, whether your firewalls, whether your all other kind of user terminals, all are secure or not. So we need to consider all IT security, cyber security perspective, all those aspects, while considering not only or believing only whatever the 5G, what 3GPP provides. Yes, those network elements are secure based on the specifications, right? Those technology, those applications are secure based on the applications. But once you're deploying it in your network, it is your CSO organization to decide how the organization is taking the security to their organization. So that we need to consider while doing the 5G network.
Thank you. Ravi, with some big recent announcements from hyperscalers and edge providers, what do you see their role being in the development of 5G networks?
Very interesting question. I think right now we are in a situation where we are spoiled by the choices, right, so to speak, because there are two set of key stakeholders. In fact, three, which I think Upal also mentioned and Mukesh also mentioned previously, right? So we have telecom operators who are really providing that connectivity and the infrastructure to us. But I think the biggest also contributor to delivering those services to the market are the hyperscalers and edge providers, right? Now, you will see a lot of companies providing edge capabilities today, both from a hardware perspective and the security perspective. But we also see hyperscalers making huge investments. You talk about AWS, GCP, or Azure in that case. Now, what is interesting that is coming up is, I think you will see that as a user, sometimes it is confusing to say, hey, should I go to the hyperscaler to do the implementation, or should I go to the individual edge providers? And those are the calls which, again, needs to be taken based on use case to use case, right? Now, AWS has come up with a very fantastic concept called wavelength, which means that it is not actually very close to or the infrastructure on your premise, but very close to your premise, so to speak, right? And then those wavelengths are connected to your edge. So if you look at the aggregation point, so you have edge, those edges are connected to probably to the wavelength, and from wavelength it is going to the cloud, right? Which is a great concept, and you can implement a number of use cases from that perspective. And what hyperscalers are claiming, and which is very interesting as well, that any application that you put on edge or a wavelength or cloud is centrally managed by the hyperscalers, which gives enormous flexibility for people to deploy their applications both on cloud, on edge, on wavelength, and you don't need to worry about your development cycle, your testing cycle, because it comes with an ecosystem on its own, right? But the enterprises are also thinking on those sides is that, should I get stuck into one particular hyperscaler, or do I need a flexibility to say, I want to use what I want to use as edge providers or a cloud providers, and somehow I think I need a mechanism or a system integrator or a software company which can really tie all these things together, because I should pick up what I really want rather than just being tied up to one hyperscaler. So that's where the independent edge providers are playing a big part in this. But I think we have to also look at, from an ecosystem perspective, that while these edge applications or edge devices are there, and you have cloud and you have wavelengths of the world, what is important is, end of the day, it's all application and the data, I would say, play, right? End of the day, what applications you want to put in this ecosystem, which will drive your digital transformation agenda, what data that you want to measure on or put on or analyze on, which will give you the immediate insights for you to deliver business outcomes, is a call that we need to take. But the ecosystem is getting built. I don't think that it is mature enough to tell the enterprise that this is the top one solution or top two solution or top three solutions. I think it's still, there are a lot of solutions floating around in the market, and everyone is talking about great solutions, how great they are in the market. But I think it is really, it will take a bit of a time for the enterprises to just sit and evaluate what is the use case and what kind of combination of these, deployment of edge and applications that they need to go for. But at the same time, I think what is interesting enough is the IoTs of the world, which most of the edge providers and 5G providers are relying on. That market is pretty mature, because IoT is not a game that recently came up. We have been working with IoTs for such a long time. So from that perspective, a lot of the mature market is already in place for the enterprises to take that into consideration, hook that into the current 5G and edge infrastructure, and deliver what business is looking for. So I think the ecosystem exists partially in a mature market like IoT's applications of the world, but I think we need to be careful about the edge and the hyperscalers game as to which option that you should pick, which will deliver the right transactions and services for you.
Definitely, I think that's wonderful advice. I think many people appreciate that perspective, especially when they're just getting familiar with a market that's so new and unknown. So thank you, Ravi. Gaurav, I wanted to circle back to you. We talked a lot about security threats, risks, challenges. We even talked about some solutions. From your perspective, from a security standpoint, cybersecurity standpoint, what can our organizations and partners do in order to remove some of the security hurdles which exist?
Right. So it seems very complicated in terms of like, how do we take care of security? And there are different parts of the ecosystem. You have the hyperscalers or the cloud providers. I've got my edge networks. I've got my private cloud running in a data center, and so on and so forth. So if we dial back a little, and based on Mukesh's approach, like let's look at the fundamentals, right? And actually, Ravi mentioned in the comment previously, the fundamental thing that we are trying to protect is the application and actually the data, right? So let's look at data security, and that being the key piece that we are all trying to protect, right? And from that perspective, you look at data, where it's stored, where it's transmitted, and then how it's processed. And stored is traditionally taken care of, within the corporate boundaries. Transmission was taken care of with 5G and some additional adjacent technologies. You'll hear terms like SASE. So a lot of the telcos are using SASE to protect the network traffic across the infrastructure. So you can combine 5G, you can combine SASE for the second part of the data transmission, which is data in transit use case. But there's a third piece, which is data in use, which is another key component. And traditionally, it was protected using various different patchwork of security across the infrastructure stack. But there are various new methods that are going to address that piece. Confidential computing being the forerunner in that, where you can protect data in use and combine it with other parts of the data security principle, data at rest and data in transit, as I mentioned. But there are others in the market. There is homomorphic encryption, there are quantum-based technologies, and you can combine those. And we, from Hub Security perspective, are really focused on confidential computing, because that becomes a very easy way to eliminate some of the complexity that security traditionally brings, right? That's the big challenge. And we believe from a confidential computing perspective, and there are a lot of key players like Intel, AMD, and even the hyperscalers have their own solutions that are doing confidential computing in the public cloud. But then how do you bring it securely to the edge is where the other interesting part becomes. So I think that's the path that we should look at. Look at data from data at rest, data in transit, and data in use, which is the third pillar. I think if you look at it from that lens, that starts bringing a lot of clarity in terms of how we can solve the cybersecurity challenges.
Thanks, Gaurav. I want to ask our final question for this topic and then head into Q&A, because we've been getting a lot of questions in both the chat and the Q&A modal, for those of you who couldn't find the chat before. So my final question will be for Utpal, and maybe you can talk a little bit about why and how the edge cloud security creates an additional dimension to what we think about when we think about centralized data.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Gaurav and Ravi briefly touched about this, right? But when we look at edge security or differentiation, there are basically three things to focus on. One is edge device security to protect, the endpoints. The second is the cloud security to protect data, which is getting more closer to the edge as we run models. And then the third is network edge security, if you will. And Gaurav touched upon this. SASE is very common or prevalent these days, but also confidential compute. I mean, combination of those are critical to managing those three pieces, which I mentioned: device security, data, which basically is being leveraged to the edge, either through AI models or machine learning models or whatever workloads you're doing over there. And then the third is the network edge security. So those are the three pieces that become critical.
Does anyone have anything to add to that? If not, we'll just wrap up our discussion here. Okay. Thank you, Utpal. And with that, I wanted to thank you for a wonderful discussion. We will wrap up our discussion phase of this event and set in for really early Q&A, because there are a lot of questions coming in from you guys on things you'd like to learn more about. So I want to just start with a really basic Q&A here, which is a question, which is a good place to start. Charles is asking, can you explain network slicing? Any takers?
Yeah, this is Utpal, I can take it.
Go ahead.
Absolutely, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, basically it's creating a certain dedicated network subset, hence the word slicing, to put dedicated use case within that certain limitation or restriction that we have created. So in a very simple nutshell, it's having a dedicated network for a use case, for a particular requirement or business problem to solve. Go ahead, Gaurav.
No, I'm not an expert in any shape or form in the network slicing piece. Renan, maybe you might want to chime in a little bit on that. Anybody else?
Let me add further on this one. So what Utpal mentioned, right? So is a complete network, right? It is a core network mainly. Core network, different elements are there. Those different elements, how you can, like, if you talk about the simple HLR, those kind of in the 3G, 4G world, right? So how those, like, instead of central, those HLR, how you are giving this to individual enterprises. So the complete network sliced, all those network component, virtual functions are sliced for a specific enterprise. So a dedicated network, complete core network is created for the specific enterprise or specific use cases. Where all the security aspects, all the connectivity aspects, those are taken care by design.
And maybe the next question is, how does that get enabled, or how does that happen? There are technologies out there as the telcos are moving over to creating the next generation of networks. They leverage, you must have heard the buzzwords like SDN, NFV, which stands for software-defined network, and network functional virtualization, which is what they use as technologies, if you will, to create those network slicing to meet the specific requirements of a customer who would have a particular use case for that requirement, if you will.
Right, and in the chat, I just wanted to add, Cesar and Sham mentioned quality of service is a key part of the network slicing piece, right? So thank you for that, latency, throughput, and security. Thank you, Sham.
I think it's good to add this discussion about network slicing, that the network slicing is only possible on 5G release 16 for the TGPP. I think that's a new feature that the 5G, the 3GPP release 16 comes to, is a great feature. It's only enabled on release 16.
Thank you, Renan.
Just Paul is asking, security on 5G core cloud NFVs is complex, considering handling applications and OS of different release versions in NSA. Then they write in parentheses, non-containerized SA. What's your view on this, and what's the way forward? I'll send you guys the question in the chat and so you can see it.
Yes, that would be helpful. Sterny, are you sending the question in the chat?
Ah, sorry, I thought I sent it. I sent it to the admin. Let's see.
Ah. I think, Ravi, you mentioned the NSA and the SA part, right? Do you want to take this one?
Yeah, Gaurav, I'm not a security expert, so I can't comment on the security part.
So I think, yeah, so one of the questions, I mean, I'm not really familiar with the 5G core, so pardon my ignorance, but if the question is really around containerization and how it's going to help, and that and Cesar actually answered that question, is really looking at the deep packet inspection of it, right? So what we need to do is, when the containerization aspect gets introduced, you look at various parts of the compute infrastructure, and you look at the container layer, if you're running Kubernetes, or the Docker container layer, and then you also look at the application tier, and essentially have the ability to apply controls across these different stacks by doing deep packet inspection.
Yeah. I can add on to that what Gaurav mentioned. So I guess the question is how easy or difficult it is. Obviously, a lot depends on your existing infrastructure. A lot depends on your modernization initiative that you have taken over. A lot depends because a lot of the companies also are basically, merged through legacy mergers and acquisition. And so in many cases, you have a mishmash of legacy systems, latest systems, digital, et cetera. So I guess the standard answer, which nobody wants to say, is it depends. But the reason why it depends is because of multiple factors. How clean your data is, how modernized your applications are, whether you have containerized or not, because obviously if you've containerized it, you have moved through a certain level of application and device modernization, which you can obviously leverage or piggyback on. But if not, the cost can be huge depending on what subsets you're trying to do. Sometimes it's easy from a digital standpoint because you don't have a legacy base, but then you also have to focus on cybersecurity and threats. From a back-end enterprise standpoint, if the systems have not been modernized, it does create some additional cost and complexity to make sure that those things are properly integrated. So easier said than done. It depends from use case to use case, customer to customer, and the cost will vary depending on your portfolio.
Thank you, Iqbal.
Thank you, Iqbal. Let's see, our next question here. What are different IoT applications we can migrate from LTE-M to 5G, and why is it important? I think we covered some of this already. We talked about different technologies that can be used in lieu of private 5G. Anyone wants to take this, or should I go to the next? Oh, Renan.
I can take this. It's very, very similar to use the LTE-M with 5G, but the 5G has the improvement of a massive the density of devices inside a site or a coverage. And when you use LTE, you have a quantity of devices. As 5G has a lot improvement about the density of the devices connected to our area. I think that's the main challenge in the main feature that the 5G brings to the LTE-M or KTM1, M2, and so on.
Next question. I have another. Do you mind if I just go through them really quickly? Because we have so many and we have some time. But yeah, Mukesh, did you want to?
Yeah, I just want to add further what Renan mentioned, right? So the feature of 5G, like massive machine type communication, that particular feature is different than LTE and help in the IoT application management for smart cities and those kind of things. So like some of the studies says that in 1 kilometer area, you can have 1 million devices which can be managed by 5G. So that's the difference in the 5G compared to LTE.
So thank you. Ravi, you look like you want to say something, but
No, I'm just reading one of the questions where people are talking about. The question from Rohan is, why is it difficult for telco to generate more revenue? ARPU is overall world.
yeah.
How can telco pivot the business? I think we touched upon the industry part and the market part to start with that. I think if you see the entire broadband and the call business of telcos is getting commoditized anyway, right? So they are not generating huge amount of revenue out of that, and hence you see, they already lost the market in the past. So if you look at the whole OTT space, telcos have lost a lot of money to, for example, WhatsApps and Facebooks of the world from that perspective. And I don't think that, and I don't feel that telcos want to lose this market, because there's a huge potential for them to reach out to not only the consumers, but also for the enterprise. And where we see telcos are slightly changing the game plan here. So they are not interested just to sell connectivity services to the enterprises, because they know that they'll be challenged, there will be a price war when it comes to connectivity going forward. But instead, what they are doing is they're trying to create a partner ecosystem, which could be a system of hyperscalers working alongside with telco operators. And you see already hyperscalers like AWS working with, for example, Verizon's, Vodafone's, BTs of the world. So as Google or Azure working with AT&T, T-Mobile, and all of these multiple different operators. And why they are doing it is, cloud plays a very, very important role when it comes to 5G. So as Utpal touched upon SDN, NFV, so the infrastructure perspective will be more software driven. And for that, you need cloud infrastructure along with connectivity. So that is one element why telcos wants to work with hyperscalers. The second part is, the industries are not just looking at connectivity. They are coming and saying, what are my business challenges that you're going to solve along with 5G. So the business case and the use case is extremely important for enterprise to buy any services from telcos. So the partner ecosystem, which telcos are trying to build, has an element of hyperscalers and edge providers, but most importantly, they are working on a number of industry use cases along with what I call system integrators or third parties, application providers, so on and so forth. And those industry solutions are, for example, which we touched upon, I can take an example of a smart factory, okay, as a standard, which everyone understands today, I think, on the call. And why smart factory solution is important for if you go to an enterprise. So telcos will say, enterprise, you are not only going to get connectivity and the entire edge and cloud capability as infrastructure for you, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to put an entire IoT ecosystem for you to manage your production line, your logistic management, your health and safety of an employee using some of the smart belts and smart devices to the employees. And I'm going to run your entire robotic automations on the factory. I'm going to make your entire informed decision making through the AI on edge. I'm going to give you the entire augmented reality, virtual reality applications on edge so that you can run test and diagnostics. The field engineers can take the app, put it in front of the machine. It will tell you which part of the machine has a problem and how to fix that. So the entire application management, if they take it along with 5G and connectivity, that's where you see a tremendous revenue opportunity for telcos, not only for the telcos, but the partner ecosystem which telcos are building. Right. So that's where I think the telcos will definitely take an edge when it comes to the enterprise business. But what is there for the consumer side of the business? The consumer side of the business, I don't think they can simply say, hey, because you are using 5G network, pay me £5 extra or a $10 or a 20 euros extra, because I don't think consumers will pay eventually. Right. So what they will do is they'll go into more of a providing an app and a platform to the consumers to consume. And that is where most of the telcos are really thinking about digitalizing their services, be it be video conferencing, the voice capabilities, be it be the content part of thing, like, you can watch content on the go and so on and so forth, because those are the capabilities which telcos can monetize and really back it up with the strong connectivity which they already have. So that's where I think that telcos can make a differentiation, provided they do all of these things that we just talked about.
Yeah, and I can just take a minute to comment on exactly what Ravi said. He is spot on. If the telcos traditionally just focus on connectivity, then basically it's a race to the bottom. And they have been commoditized. It's all going to get further marginalized, and it is not sustainable to just have, as they call it, dumb pipes. So the focus is on compute and connectivity to become relevant. And therefore, if you notice, customers like you and I will not be paying more. We don't want to pay more for our bills. So the B2C focus, while it will be there, will now become B2B focus to increase ARPU for the telcos, which stands for average revenue per user or consumer. And therefore, the focus is now on creating ecosystem plays, platform plays, because telco, or for that matter, not one company can do everything by themselves. And so it's very relevant and important for telcos to focus on compute plus connectivity, and they have to work with hyperscalers, they have to work with other security companies, they have to work with SIs, they have to work with edge companies. So it creates an ecosystem, and not one person will, or not one company will own the platform. It's going to be a combination of players on the platform. And you will see many times where companies will collaborate and also compete. And that's the new model, at least in the current future.
Yeah, wonderfully summarized, Utpal and Ravi. I think this is more of an ecosystem play. And as Utpal said, it's not just the connectivity piece, but it's a compute aspect. So from a telco's perspective, value add on top of what they do in terms of just providing connectivity is going to be the differentiator and the revenue stream for them. So yeah, thank you for that wonderful summary.
Yep. What is the panel's view on how the 5G ecosystem is handling cross-layer security challenges? So we spoke about this a lot. We know different security technologies are effective in their own domains, but is anybody close to a unified framework to coordinate these technologies across the 5 security layers within 5G NPNs? It's important so that a gap in any layer does not negate the benefits gained in others, ?
Yeah, I can take that
And
one.
share it
Yeah, I'm reading that one. And we've talked about it, right? So look at not just the secure connectivity, but the secure compute aspect, as we've been talking about, and really data at rest, data in transit, and data in use. And this is the way that you look at it. And then when you're looking at data in use, the idea is across the compute infrastructure. So you look at the hardware layer, the BIOS layer, the container layer, and the app layer, right? Simplifying it, but the idea is how do you apply controls across these different parts. So you look at the 5G, 3GPP spec, you look at SASE, and you look at confidential compute, and these would provide you enough to create a unified framework to handle some of the challenges that we've been discussing.
Yeah, someone else was asking, what is the current cost of implementing the different layers of security into existing solutions? Will it be feasible? Yeah, will it be feasible to tackle all the imaginable security?
Right.
Or will we need to lose something?
Look, I mean, I think it's very hard to quantify that part, but the reality is security is struggling because, and I've mentioned it, it's most of the security controls are applied in a patchwork manner, right? And it takes infinite amount of time and money to get that done. And even after you do that, you're already at a backhand because the attacks have changed. So if you combine these different pieces that we've been talking about, that gives you the ability to move very, very quickly and securely release these key technologies that we've been talking about. So the idea really is, how do we eliminate the cost of applying controls across the infrastructure, the compute stack, and across the transmission aspect of it? If you do this, the study around it, I think 5G design, SASE, and confidential compute, as I mentioned, would give you a very quick route to securing the infrastructure and releasing the technologies very securely.
Thank you, Gaurav. Anyone wants to add on to that? If not, I'll go on to the next question.
So just want to add, like as Gaurav and others mentioned, that even though we have the 5G by design security controls, we have 3GPP specifications, but to deploy such complex systems, it requires holistic approach, right? As Gaurav mentioned, data level, where is data residing, what data in transit, and who's using data. So it would not automatically resolve all the deep-seated legacy if any deficiency are there in the organization, right? So it has to be taken care accordingly. All this network perimeter security, all those things has to be taken care. Just want to add that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mukesh.
We have a few more small questions here. I think I'll shoot out one or two, and maybe then we wrap up. There is a very specific question here. Has anyone delivered, a really specific technical question, has anyone delivered the URLLC use with less than 10 milliseconds latency? And when can we expect to see this on the field or in a real time or live environment? Okay, I got it.
Move on to the next one.
Okay, one more for you. We need a sign or something. You need to like tap your nose, or I don't know. Figure it out next time.
I think this one is too technical for us to answer, so I think we can move on.
It's emerging technology. Still, the real field applications are very few to answer this kind of questions. So not really well.
Yeah. 5G for B2B is certainly exciting. However, here in what is already being referred to as the UK Silicon Valley for the global gaming industry, 5G has been evolving for some time, largely in developing new MR B2C experiences. What excites our panel most about our 5G future? Don't all speak at once.
I think I'll talk about the mixed reality part of it, because and somehow associated with gaming as well, right? To a great extent. I think we need to look at from two perspectives, because volumetrics is very, very important when it comes to adoption of such technologies. Because today, when you look at the whole AR and VR experience, most of the applications are running on cloud, and you are pretty happy because the number of users are very less for you to see the impact of the speed and the latency and the throughput of those applications. So I don't think the current testing that we do on cloud services will really give you a good hands-on as to what would be the impact when millions of such customers will start using applications as such, right? But I think the real use cases are coming on the retail side, where you see two set of applications. One, the retail is going very heavily onto augmented reality. People sitting at home, using also virtual reality stores, so to speak, and trying out that, hey, if I want to buy a ring, how can I really test that application, and what kind of experience that I can give in a virtual reality mode. And similarly, we are using augmented reality for some of the use cases that I have seen still in a POC and kind of a phase, where people just want to take their apps or use the Oculus or use the glasses to see, if I'm in a store, what kind of experience that I can deliver to a different customer segment, right from the kids to a teenager to elderly people, and so forth. So those are different trials being run. Some use cases have been implemented in some shape or form, but I don't think that market is still mature enough to draw out any conclusions or parallels from that perspective. But what you see is most of the AR and VR experience is very clearly tied up with customer engaging platforms, which is what we call gaming. Right? And why it is so? Because as a consumer, if I'm going onto any portal applications today and buying a product, that journey, if I can replicate on AR, VR, I don't think any customer will get attracted because that is not immersive, that is not engaging, that is not interesting enough. So most of the applications that people are building on AR, VR is very closely associated with gamifying those experiences. So by saying, hey, if you find a product in one of our, for example, store in such and such location, I'll probably give you some sort of a coupon or a discount and so forth. So I think you will see that immersive experience is definitely going to change the experience of a consumers going forward. And where the 5G is going to play and along with edge and cloud is that once the volume increases, how these applications will start performing, not only from an experience perspective, but also from a security perspective, because you don't want all the consumers getting hooked onto cloud, but we really localize those experience and contextualize and personalize that experience as we go into that journey, so to speak.
Thank you, Ravi.
Wonderful.
I'll add to that just quickly. I mean, we've been talking mostly B2B, but I think what we're going to see is not just B2C, but there's also B2B2C kind of an experience. And I'll take one short example. Let's take very simply the food security aspect of it, right? So I mentioned in the beginning, precision agriculture. So that small piece that I'm saying is pretty big in terms of food production. And given our food production quality is going down, it's a very strong initiative, and 5G edge computing is actually driving it. And I'll give you a simple example. By using these technologies, we can actually control remote devices that can find weeds growing in the food supply and essentially have a very precise way to target that with the pesticide and not impact the rest of the food, right? So a very simple example that these kinds of technologies can unlock a lot of the capabilities that we could have dreamed, a few years ago, but are now becoming the reality.
Definitely. And with that, I think we're going to call it a show. Thank you, everyone, for your vast insights and for a really wonderful discussion. These were all very fascinating and relevant topics that are emerging within the field of security and IoT, and I'm really glad that we got the time to cover them today together. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and thank you to our speakers, Ravi, Kumar, Palepu, Renan, Antoniolli, Mukesh Bansal, Utpal Mangla, and of course, Gaurav Sharma. We hope that you're all staying safe and healthy, and we look forward to hosting many more discussions like these. If you'd like to get in touch with any of today's panelists, feel free to reach out to them directly. You'll be receiving within the coming days an email with contact information for each of our panelists, so feel free to reach out to them if you'd like. I'm sure they'd be happy to answer any questions or inquiries that you have. So with that, I say adieu, and if you'd like to stay up to date on any of our upcoming webinars, you can follow Hub Security on LinkedIn and on Twitter, and you can also check us out on Medium. Thank you guys all for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.